Hi, I'm Ed.
Hi, I'm Huw, and welcome to Tone Twins TV and our first episode with a pair of Fender TV front deluxe amplifiers.
5A3s.
When were they made?
1951.
Yeah, and these two are actually within 5 numbers of each other on the serial number. This one's mine.
This one's mine. They look a bit different, just how they've worn over the years, but they're really, really similar amps, aren't they?
Very similar. I've had this one since about 2002, 2003, and yours is a more recent acquisition.
Yeah, I've had it a year or so. Picked it up, as you do nowadays, online, you know. Having heard yours over the years, great sounding amp, kept an eye out for one, and this one showed up, and I brought it over.
And it's got a little bit of history to it.
Yes, apparently used to belong to a famous guitarist called G.E. Smith.
Saturday Night Live fame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And selling off some gear and managed to pick it up.
Cool. Ed, you mentioned at the top of the show that this is the 5A3, and of course the famous Tweed Deluxe everybody knows about is the 5E3. So can you explain to us a little bit about how this Fender numbering system worked?
Yeah, of course. 5 being built in the 50s.
Okay.
A being the circuit revision, so the first sort of model of the Deluxe, 5A, and then 3 is the Deluxe.
Okay.
So another amp, a Super, for example, is a 4, 5A4 would be the first Super.
Yeah.
6, I think, is a Bassman, and so on. So the different Fender amp models had the different numbers.
Yeah.
Referring to the 5E3, like the amp you're sat on there, the circuit
evolved. Very comfortable to you.
That's it. The circuit evolved through the 50s.
Yeah.
The cabinets evolved a few times as well with different sort of circuit revisions as well.
But it's the cabinet shape, most specifically the speaker cutout, that gives these amps their TV front nickname.
Exactly. In the 50s, I imagine television was the big new medium, thing. We've got Telecasters, we've got TV front amps, TV Pros, TV Deluxes,
And this kind of looked like a 1950s television.
Exactly, yeah. It looks like an old TV. So you won't find many TVs perhaps still working from the 50s, but certainly a lot of these amps still working.
Yeah. These Tweed amps got really, really popular, probably in the late 70s with bands like the Eagles discovering that you could get overdrive tones in the studio, endless sustained lead and all this kind of stuff. And it was a time before overdrive pedals and one thing and another. So a lot of people associate with these amps with overdrive, but they are fantastic for clean sounds, especially in the studio. So we thought it'd be interesting to maybe get an insight about what one of these would sound like, played 50s style with an old Gretsch guitar and a bit of Chet Atkins picking. You up for that?
Definitely. Let's have a listen.
So how can you distinguish visually between a 5A3 and a 5E3 and everything that came in between?
The easiest way is the style of cabinet, really. The 5A3s had these TV front sort of cutouts for the speaker. They evolved, you see some Bs, certainly the Cs, the 5C3s, wide panel, big chunk of wood at the top. And then by the 5E3, 1955, you would have a 5E3 Deluxe like that one.
So this is what's known as the narrow panel.
Narrow panel, yep. And in 1955, they were a touch smaller, as that one is. And then in sort of 56, a few other visual changes. The logo changed slightly. Cabinet became a bit bigger and pretty much defined that sort of stereotypical 5E3 right up until the late late 1960. Possibly see some in 1961, around that sort of time when they transitioned into the sort of brown face era.
Yeah, and you also, if you notice, the tweed is slightly different as well. This stuff is called low contrast tweed. I don't think you can get it anywhere anymore if you're restoring one of these. But if you look at the tweed amps that Ed and I are sitting on, the stripe in the tweed is a lot easier to see. So high contrast tweed and low contrast tweed. It's another giveaway.
And it's just a sort of luggage covering at the time, wasn't it? And just tried to be sort of built for sturdiness and robustness. And to be fair, they seem to have done a pretty good job. The lacquer, depending on the conditions and the smoky bars or the studios or, in and out of gigs here and there, you see the lacquer's totally gone different colours on these amps. And that's just depending on where they've been played, really, over the years.
One thing that's common to all the Tweed Deluxe cabinets, though, is that they're all solid pine.
Yes, that's a huge part of the sound, I think. The cabinet, all these sort of Tweed amps, is that resonance of the pine cabinet adds a huge amount to the sound. You can run this into a different speaker cab and get a vastly different sort of sound.
And it's interesting because that idea of having a resonant speaker cabinet or amplifier cabinet did go out of fashion, didn't it? Especially when amps became more powerful and rock became the prevalent kind of form of guitar
massively
music.
So. I mean, you get a wider, sort of more open sound, less defined bass, less tightness, perhaps with a combo of all kinds. Certainly an open back small sort of combo like these.
Yeah.
And you do sort of notice with the smaller cabinet amps. Can be seen as a touch more boxy or as a touch more defined in the mid-range, however you want to term it, really, But certainly stick a microphone in front of one of these things and you as you'll probably hear on the video today, you could have a sound which you might think is a Marshall stack, amazing range of tones you can get from these amps.
Yeah.
So what's the real difference between a 5A3 and a 5E3 Deluxe?
I mean, we could get into the circuit, and we'll get into that later. But I think if you go back to fundamentals, conceptually they're very, very different. The 5E3 is pretty much a dedicated guitar amplifier, 2 channels, high and low inputs on each channel. Of course, nobody uses the low inputs because they're just dull and don't overdrive enough.
Yeah.
Whereas the 5A3 is essentially a mini PA system, circa 1950. Right. It seems outlandish, but if you look at the control panel, you got 3 inputs, 2 of which are labelled instruments, and 1 is labelled microphone. And the instruments inputs are designed to be mixed together and used simultaneously, and that's reflected in the circuitry. And it's not really as outlandish as you'd imagine, because you can imagine at the time, we're talking early 50s, so you can imagine some Western swing band rocking up for a gig in, in some kind of, I don't know, like a bowling alley hop or some county fair, and they've got, you can
see the scene in Back to the Future. The
exactly. So, they got a double bass, they got an acoustic guitar, neither of which need amplification. They got a lead vocalist, and then the harmonies, they can all share the microphone, and then your lap steel and maybe your Fender Broadcaster or Nocaster can basically plug into the other instrument inputs.
More like a mini PA system.
So it's exactly, there are mini PA systems.
There's actually a clue to that as well in the design, which we kind of overlook sometimes, but these have got the controls on the back, and they were designed to be put at the front of the stage. as you would imagine, to get that sound out to the audience,
Yeah.
and all the band would stand behind, so you can alter the controls from behind.
Mhm.
Whereas as the evolution of bands and stage setups that changed over the years, Fender controls eventually came onto the front in the brownface era, and then blackface.
That's right,
and so
yeah,
on,
from the 60s onwards, yeah.
We mentioned earlier about the circuits evolving from the 5A3 to the 5E3.
Mhm.
You want to elaborate about that a bit?
Yeah, certainly. The most obvious difference is in the type of preamp tubes that they were using.
Okay.
All the deluxe models had cathode biased 6 V6 power valves, but the preamp valves differed. So essentially at the beginning of the 50s they were using these things called octal tubes, which are preamp tubes, which are much bigger. They look like 6V6s really.
Big fat ones.
Big fat ones, exactly. So
yeah.
don't get them mixed up because you'll blow your amp up.
Yeah.
And the ones that were primarily used in these two are the 6SC7 and the 6SL7. Both of these have got 6SL7s, which is unsurprising given they probably came off the same workbench at the same time.
Which is amazing, yeah.
And the general consensus is that the valve lineups changed because it just depended on what stock Fender could get hold of at the time. Interestingly, sometimes you see a mixture, and sometimes if you look at the tube chart on the inside, you can see that something's been crossed out with pencil and a different tube number written in.
Famously, Leo Fender was very sort of frugal, and nothing was wasted, wasn't he? And old tube charts would be scribbled out with pen or pencil and the new model written on, or the different valve or tube.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you see the 6SC7s, the 6SL7s.
Yeah.
You know, they're not interchangeable. It's worth noting
No,
that. You do have to be careful.
Yeah.
And make sure you get the right ones for your model of amplifier.
Yeah.
Sonically, they're pretty similar.
They're also wired in a different way, and one of the problems with this amplifier is that, as I mentioned, the instrument inputs are designed for you to mix two instruments simultaneously. So they're joined by mixer resistors. But if you're only plugging in one instrument, what happens is half the signal is dumped straight to ground because you haven't got anything plugged into the other instrument.
So you're losing half your volume or your signal.
Yeah. So basically you're like permanently plugged into the low-level inputs of a conventional guitar amplifier.
Which is why perhaps some people think these things can be a bit weedy or weak sounding.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So basically, it's not a fault of the amp as such, but a byproduct of the way the amp was designed to be used. So I've rigged up this little switch to demonstrate how much effect that has on the overall tone of the stock 5A3. So first you'll hear it in stock form with the lossy input arrangement. Okay, you heard me switching in the middle of the chord being held. It introduced a little bit more noise because the second input isn't terminated to ground, but that can easily be sorted. So it's just to demonstrate how much of a difference can be made by reconfiguring the inputs to a more conventional high-low style dual input.
And then your microphone socket then is a bit different, is that right?
Yeah, the microphone socket it's actually like a really, really hot input. So if you plug your guitar into that, you get the amp to overdrive really, really quickly. But the problem is it doesn't go through the bright side of the tone circuit. So it's like the kind of dull channel. So it's loud, overdriven, and dull.
Loud and dull. So
loud and dull.
Perfect for the singer.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, if you look at certain other amps from this era, like the V-Front Super,
V-Front Super,
and also the Pro, the 15-inch Pro, which look very similar to this. The instrument inputs are actually wired like the microphone input is in this. So the guitar signal just goes directly to the valve grid, and there's actually no grid resistor in between the input and the valve itself. So it makes it really, really hot.
So in stock form, is that why people guitarists, you know, sort of Billy Gibbons and so on, love the V-front supers.
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff
because they overdrive.
and overdriven.
Yeah, they overdrive like crazy if you want them to. Following on from the preamp, once the signal's gone through the volume control and the tone control, the design of which remained consistent all the way through the Tweed Deluxe models, it reaches the phase inverter, and that's somewhere where these amps really, really differ from the later Tweed Deluxes. So the later Tweed Deluxes had something called a cathodic phase inverter, and essentially that was a zero gain phase inverter. So it wasn't they don't really drive the valves, the power valves, strongly. Okay, that basically means that most of the overdrive that you get from a late 5E3 Tweed Deluxe happens in the preamp section.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. In contrast, the paraphase phase inverter in these amplifiers really, really drives the power valves. Okay.
Which is one of the things you do feel like these early 5A3s, the whole amp is overdriven, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So you've got preamp distortion, you've also got power valve distortion, and then, you know, depending on what speaker you've got, particularly if you're running an original Jensen, you'll get more compression and overdrive from the speaker itself.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So that really does account for a big difference in the nature of the overdrive sound of the early Tweed Deluxes versus the later Tweed Deluxes.
Yes.
And you know, it's a big part of the appeal of these amplifiers for me.
Because it's worth noting that although they are fundamentally Fender 50s Tweed Deluxes, sonically they're pretty different, really.
Yeah, these aren't as fizzy or as fuzzy or as aggressive sounding. It's a much kind of richer, more harmonically loaded and kind of a smoother overdrive tone. Definitely,
and I find that the octal fat sort of preamp valves, they do tend to give a fatter mid-range tone as well.
Yeah, I find that too.
The later sort of smaller pin, you know, even though you can still characterise them as a Tweed sound.
Yeah.
In stock form, the 5A3 can produce some wonderful tones. So we decided to put a little track together to showcase some of those.
At the top of the show, you hear the two of us banging away on a couple of old guitars and making a bit of a racket, heavily overdriven rock guitar sounds, which is clearly not what these guys were intended to do. We've also got to fess up that you weren't actually hearing these amplifiers in stock form.
What, Kemper profiles, was it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Basically, no campers. We've performed a couple of really, really simple and completely reversible modifications. The first is to change the speaker, and the second is to rewire the inputs, really just to release the full potential of the amplifier more than to change it dramatically.
You say mods, sorry, but people get panicky. Oh, you're massively modifying an old historic thing, but these are really simple mods. It's worth reiterating. Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Really,
a speaker change is nothing, and you can always put the original speaker back in. And with regard to the input wiring modification that I perform on these, it's really a case of swapping over 2 wires. That's it, and they can be swapped back. But the main one to talk about, I think, at this point in time, and it's perhaps the more contentious one, is the idea of swapping out the original Jensen speakers for modern replacements.
A big part of the original sound of, Tweed Fenders in particular, are these very low wattage Alnico 5 magnet Jensen speakers, which
P12.
P12R in these, which was a sort of 10 to 15 watt speaker. The amplifier produces the same sort of wattage, 10, 12 watts or so. So you can imagine the speaker is really on the edge, even when the amp is sort of halfway up. We found that if you find your original speaker still in an old amp, chances are it's blown by now. They're not the longest lasting things. They don't really stand up to modern playing, chugging away big heavy chords and so on.
Being hit by overdrive pedals.
I mean, fantastic sounding for that clean, slightly edge of breakup, really distinctive.
Oh, it's a real kind of pretty, kind of delicate kind of treble tone, especially if you're not pushing them too hard. But as soon as you start giving them a bit of level, they compress quite dramatically, don't they? And you get a kind of, you get a rough overdrive quality to them. Look, some people love it, and I'm a fan too. There's a lot to be said for the vintage Jensen tone, and at the end of the day, a lot of people like these amplifiers because they're just like a window into musical history. They're so evocative. You can plug into a stock 5A3 or most vintage Fenders, and it's almost like being transported back in time. It's that tone that you've heard on the records. The question you have to ask as an owner of one of these amps is, am I going to use it as a special effects amplifier occasionally, or do I like this amplifier so much that I'm going to basically want to use it in a much wider range of contexts?
Definitely, speakers have come a long way, and even by the sort of early 60s, speakers had evolved a lot. And you stick a slightly more powerful speaker in there, or a slightly different, design and so on. I mean, we've got Celestian Blues in here, which add, a touch more sort of British chime perhaps in the top end, or certainly allow the amp to breathe a bit more in the top end. They hold together a bit more, bit sort of sweeter overdrive.
There's another crucial thing that they got, because they're much more efficient than Jensen speakers and most other guitar speakers, in fact. They make these amps louder than they would be with the Jensens. And because the amp is louder and also brighter, it also means that you've potentially got more clean headroom, because the way the tone control interacts with the volume control in these amps is quite interesting. There's quite a wide range of sounds and overdrive textures that you can get out of these amps. As you turn up the tone control, the amp actually produces more gain as it gets brighter. So you can compensate by turning the volume control down.
Yeah, it's almost like another gain control, isn't it?
Totally.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Or you can whack up the volume and back off the tone. And it's about getting the most out of these amps. Is really about finding how to balance those two up and get the best results out of the interaction.
Definitely. I mean, we've touched on the fact that there's only sort of very simple control layout, but a few tweaks here and there, you can get a wide range of sounds. Which with an upgraded or certainly a different speaker, perhaps you can make the most of them. Certainly gigging wise, must have gigged this amp 100 times or so by now, and with a more modern speaker in there, you know, it's still going strong. Whereas I've gigged old Jensen speakers and they don't last. You know, you can have them reconed, of course, but you will generally perhaps find, like you say, they're suited to one thing fantastically well. And they do that sort of Americana, clean on the edge of breakup. You know, that's what they do really, really well.
So what I think we should do, because I've got the original speaker from this amplifier.
Okay.
How about we revert this one back to stock form, and then we take you through each stage of the modifications, and you can hear what a stock 5A3 will sound like, what it'll sound like with a Celestian Blue in there, and then finally what it sounds like with a Celestian Blue and the input mod completed.
Yeah,
should we give it a shot?
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Okay, so the input wiring mod to make this like V-front specs is simply to swap this wire and this wire across. Well, you've heard how the sound of the 5A3 evolves as we go through each of the mods, with Ed playing that red Strat. And just to put it in a little bit more context, what we're going to do is compare the 5A3 with completely stock wiring with a 5E3 with completely stock wiring and the original speakers. So you're going to hear both amps with clean sounds and overdriven sounds, and then you can hear exactly the same sound samples, but this time with the 5E3 completely stock and the 5A3 after all the mods. So we're back to having both amplifiers in modified form, and we decided to throw another track together, showcasing some of the more overdriven sounds for lead and rhythm playing. Hope you enjoy it.
Let's rock. Thanks very much for watching our video on the Fender 583 Deluxe.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and do check us out again because we've got a load more content coming your way on vintage amplifiers, guitars and much more besides.
So please leave us a comment below, click subscribe.
In the box down there.
Very good. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. Double.